The FCC has just prohibited Chinese telecom and video surveillance equipment that poses a risk to national security from being authorized for sale or importation into the United States. Jack Horrigan is a research analyst at Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technology. Jack, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mimi. It's great to be here.
So what are the national security risks? What's the worst that can happen?
Sure. So you can kind of think of these risks as falling into two buckets. So the first bucket, and the one that gets talked about the most, has to do with cybersecurity. So the risk here is that the Chinese government and Chinese private sector are very closely intertwined. And under law, Chinese companies are required to assist intelligence agencies with their mission. So from the US perspective, the risk is that Chinese government could use this equipment as conduits into US networks to conduct espionage, hacking, all kinds of other nefarious activities. The idea being that once they gain access to this equipment, they can use that to springboard into other parts of the network. A recent FBI investigation, for instance, found that Huawei equipment deployed on cell phone towers near US military bases could potentially be used to intercept or even disrupt really sensitive military communications, included those related to nuclear command and control. Obviously, it's an extreme example, but it kind of highlights the risk.
But very scary.
But very scary, very scary. And then the other bucket is more kind of economic focused. So some of these companies are very dominant in their markets. Hikvision and Dahua, two of the companies that were just in the FCC ban, are the largest producers of video surveillance equipment in the world. So from the US perspective, banning this equipment kind of creates a market where more trustworthy companies could sell their technologies, hopefully use that to gain market share, gain customers, and become more globally competitive.
So there's certain equipment that the ban covers. What about the components? I mean, what about the microelectronics that go into the equipment?
So the FCC is still trying to figure out what to do with the components. My understanding is that this kind of covers final products. And they are still kind of seeking out comment on how to handle some of the components in this equipment.
And this applies to future authorizations, future sales. So what about the stuff that's already out there?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So there's a lot of equipment on the market from these companies that has already received FCC authorization, and that equipment is still available, still can be legally bought and sold. And it still presents the same kinds of risks. So if we want to address those risks, additional action from the government will be needed.
Could this equipment have simply been regulated instead of an outright ban? Would that have worked?
So potentially. The technology supply chain related to some of this equipment is very complex. So gaining transparency into that has been like a very big issue in the last few years. So regulating it and figuring out where it could potentially be used safely and where it could potentially present risks is one way to move forward. But I think an outright ban might be a bit more effective in making sure that this equipment doesn't enter the market in the first place, because again, it really depends on where it's being deployed. And you know, if depending on where it's deployed, it could present some real risks. And again, it could be used to jump from maybe one part of the network where it could be regulated in a safe way to another part of the market or another part of the network where it could present some real risks.
Which brings up the question of implementation and how difficult this will be in implementing.
Yes. So the implementation part of this has been pretty challenging. So since 2019, federal agencies, for instance, have been prohibited from buying this equipment. So this equipment is on paper already out of the equation at the federal level. Implementing this rule, this Section 889 rule, which banned this equipment, it has proven to be a challenge. So implementing it across the entire US network, again, given some of the supply chain transparency issues that I talked about before, could be a real issue. Yeah.
And this is the latest in a series of steps trying to address the same issue. I mean, how effective has this been, and will this really make an impact?
So I think that even if it is implemented effectively, we won't see the impact for at least a few years. As I mentioned, as you pointed out, this only applies to future equipment. So there's going to be a lot of equipment from these companies still in the market, still in circulation. And that will eventually get phased out. And there are things that the government could do to expedite that process. But until then, we are still going to be seeing like a lot of risks from these companies. And I think that kind of more broadly, even a few years down the line, this rule will only really have its intended effect if more affordable and trustworthy alternatives are made available on the market.
And you say affordable
Yeah.
because this will have an impact on consumers. Chinese stuff is just cheaper.
Yes, and that's one of the big appeals of this technology is it's very, very cheap. So like hike vision cameras, for instance, are often less than half the price of similar equipment manufactured in Japan, South Korea, US allied countries. So if there are not those affordable, trustworthy options available on the market, you could see consumers, whether they be state and local governments, private companies, individuals, shifting from this equipment to other equipment manufactured by Chinese companies that aren't included in this ban, but still present the same risks. So that wouldn't necessarily be much better than the situation where we find
The
ourselves.
FCC commissioner has also said that they want to ban TikTok.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
That is a bit outside of my wheelhouse, so I can't really comment on the TikTok stuff.
All right. Well, Jack, thanks so much for coming on the program. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you too, Mimi.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.